The purpose of this video is to give you an overview of the phases involved in developing a piece of software. These phases apply whether you are developing a small piece of software, a mobile app, or a comprehensive system in a big organization. So let's get familiar with the terminology. Typically, 5 things are involved in developing software, and you may want to think about it like this. Picture yourself being a software developer. You have your own company, and you have been approached by a client to develop software. So the first order of business is called requirement analysis. In simple words, you need to know what the client wants. Typically, this involves identifying what is it that the user of the software will supply to the system, how is the user interface, and what is the system in return is supposed to produce. So basically, it's defining the input and the output. The next phase involves design, and that is finding a way to produce the output given the input. This could be as simple as doing an arithmetic calculation. It could be a comprehensive algorithm. It could be a lookup for a database. It could be a lookup to a web service that supplies the needed information. And of course, in a typical scenario, it involves a little bit of each of these various things. Design is where, if you like, the intelligence of the system resides. And it is quite abstract. It has nothing to do with the details of how the user interface is done, how the output is presented to the user. Instead, it focuses on the heart of the problem and how to solve this problem. Once design is done, we need to turn it into something that a computer can execute, and that's the implementation phase. It's here that you pick a programming language that is appropriate for the overall requirement of the system, a platform, whether it's mobile, whether it's a web service. All the details related to the technology is involved in this stage, in the implementation phase. So this implies that the design itself is agnostic to the platform, whether the ultimate system is going to run in a browser or if it's going to run in a compute server. It really doesn't matter. Whether it's going to be programmed in Python or JavaScript or Java or any such language is irrelevant for the design. The design is really procedural and mathematical in nature. Implementation is where the technology is involved. Once the implementation is done, you move to testing, and that's where you test the various pieces of the software, each on its own, in a process known as unit testing, to make sure that each component is behaving correctly in light of its requirement. You can think of this as a contract, and each component has a contract. It has preconditions that should be satisfied and post-condition that it should satisfy. And if it meets the contract, then it passes the unit test. Otherwise, it fails the test. Moreover, in addition to testing each component on its own, when you put all the components together, they should know how to talk to each other, and they should cooperate to produce the solution that is intended by the designer. So in addition to unit testing, there is integration testing to put everything together. Once that is done, and we have a working piece of software, we need to deploy it. Deployment depends on the setting. Sometimes it's as simple as putting the app on the App Store, on the Play Store. In an internal development within a corporation, deployment means installing the system on the various workstations in a department, let's say. Deployment also involves migrating data if the system is replacing an existing system. It may involve some training and stuff like that. So actually turning a piece of software into something that people can use is the deployment phase. And of course, it depends on the setting. Those 5 phases of the development process have been identified since computing started some 60 years ago, and they have not really changed from over those years. In fact, the industry has named jobs and careers and positions after them. So people who work in requirement analysis are known as analysts. People who work in the design are known as designers or architects. Implementers are programmers, and you also have testers and so on. So these are the phases of the process. And notice that I'm calling them phases rather than stages. And let me turn to that, because we have identified them as such, but we haven't really commented on the sequencing of them. Do they go step by step like this or not? Now, originally, the model that was adopted was the so-called Waterfall Model, and it involves a linear ordering of these 5 stages, now I can call them. And just like a waterfall, each stage culminates in some deliverable. For example, the requirement will deliver a requirement document, and it will feed the design of the solution. It culminates in an algorithm. It feeds the implementation, which culminates in a program, which can be tested and later deployed, and so on. So traditionally, and for quite a long time, maybe 30 or 40 years, it has been indeed a waterfall, and the sequencing has been linear. However, as systems got more complicated, as the nature of business got more involved, this model stopped working and it got replaced. The new model maintains those 5 stages, but they're not ordered in a linear fashion like this. Why is that? What's the problem of this system? Well, we can identify 3 kinds of risks that arise if such a model is adopted. The first one is requirement change. You sat with the client, you gathered the requirement, and then you went ahead, produced the document so the designers can work on it. But by the time it got implemented, the client now has a different requirement. All right. So the waterfall model works fine as long as the business never changes its mind as to what is it that they want to implement. But in today's environment, in today's highly dynamic, competition-based kind of business, requirement changes extremely quickly, and the water model is too static to be able to respond quickly to this. Requirement change is one of the key reasons why linear ordering doesn't work. There are also architectural risks. Sometimes you have determined that the system can work with 3 components. You develop the 3 components. They work perfectly, each one on its own. But near the end of the development cycle, when you put those components together, suddenly you realize that they don't talk well with each other. And this might be because one is using a certain, I don't know, format. One, let's say, produces XML, while the second one expects JSON or something like this. And this problem is not discovered early on. So a lot of things were based on wrong assumptions, if you like. And because of that, the architecture doesn't fit together. Wrong assumptions also arise when we don't really understand what the client wants, right? And we won't find out till we deliver the project to the client. Only then the client will say, oh, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I said, and so on. So because of this, we need to find a way to adapt much more quickly to changes. And there's a new process that still involves the 5 stages, but it involves them in an iterative fashion. So rather than saying we're going to do the first phase completely for the entire project and then move to phase 2, we're going to do all 5 phases in one iteration and see, evaluate, and then repeat again for another one. So we're going to go through the process iteratively. Also, we're going to do it incrementally vis-a-vis the features. So we don't have to meet every feature in the requirement in our first release. We can just pick 1 or 2 simple features, design them and implement them, meet the client, see if everything is okay, clear any misunderstanding that arises, and once everything is good, we move on to the next feature. So the model that we're going to adopt is called the iterative model. Sometimes it's called the unified process. And as you can see, it still involves requirement gathering, designing an algorithm, implementing, testing, but it does it it's like churning a release, one rotation at a time, right? And every now and then incorporating more and more features of the requirement. Only after enough percolation, if you like, is done, it culminates with a system that's acceptable to the client, because part of this evaluation involves acceptance testing. Only then we can have a deployment of the system.